This episode of the No Film School podcast is brought to you by MusicBed. Hey everybody, I'm Liz Nord, and you're listening to the No Film School podcast. I've always argued that one of the best things about reality TV is that it gave mainstream audiences an appetite for nonfiction stories and thus paved the way for verite documentary films to have a life outside of the festival circuit. I think the same is happening now for short documentaries due to the insane proliferation of short nonfiction on the internet. Following my reality TV theory, I could argue that people filming their own lives and even things like cat videos created an appetite for the higher quality documentary shorts that are now being produced by or finding distribution on very reputable sites like The Guardian, The New York Times, and Topic.com. On today's show, I discuss this golden age of doc shorts with a great roundtable of 3 filmmakers who had short doc screening at South by Southwest last month, including Charlie Tyrrell, who won the festival's jury award for his wonderfully titled My Dead Dad's Porno Tapes, and filmmakers Mohamed Gorgistani and Leah Gallant. I think you'll enjoy our conversation about the doc shorts landscape, how they each got their projects made, and how shorts can fit into your filmmaking career's bigger picture, even if you've already worked on commercials or features. Welcome to the No Film School podcast.
Thank
Hello.
you.
Hey. Thanks for having us.
So why don't you start by introducing yourselves and your films?
So my name is Leah Gallant, and I'm the director of Death Metal Grandma, which is about 97-year-old Inga Ginsburg, who has decided to break out as a death metal singer.
My name is Charlie Tyrrell, and I'm the director of My Dead Dad's Porno Tapes, which is about my dad and his porno tapes.
I really want to see that, by the way.
So good.
Come on out.
I'm Mohamed Gorgistani. I'm the director of Sister Hearts. Sister Hearts is about an incredible woman named Miriam, and she was incarcerated for 13 years, spent 7 years in solitary confinement. When she got out, she was homeless, and post-Katrina was squatting and found things to sell on street corners, and ended up getting a small storefront that, so she could sleep at and sell stuff. And now she has a 15,000 square foot thrift store that serves as a re-entry facility for women ex-offenders in New Orleans. Yeah.
I love when we get to do these roundtables because all the films are so different, but I think there's probably something similar at their heart, which we'll get to. But just talking about shorts, with a feature, if it's going to be a shorter feature because you have, with a narrative, I should say, you have a script. So I'm wondering if for these particular films you knew they were going to be shorts, or if you didn't, at what point did you decide, this is really more of a short?
For me, it was it was out the gate. Knowing we were going to make a short. The release strategy for the Forever Dreams series that this is a part of is short format. So, and I'm working on a feature film that's I think you can only kind of do one feature at a time. At least my brain can. So this was meant to be a short from the beginning. So it was never a question of, is this going to be a feature? Is it going to be a short? But
Yeah, so for mine, it was absolutely always going to be a short. I actually want it to be a lot shorter. Originally, it was going to be a 60-second film.
Oh.
And then it was going to be a 7-minute film. There's a tape recorder, which I found that has a lot of arguments between my dad and my grandma. And originally, I was just going to do an animation short based off of just that tape recorder and like a 60-second clip. And then when we expanded it out, I really, really wanted to hold to the 7-minute mark just to keep it, because it's such a personal story. I didn't want to go on and on with it. But we landed at, just over 13 minutes and it felt good. So that's where we stuck.
Yeah, for Inga, it was a little complicated because when I had first met her, she was going to apply to a singing competition. So I thought, that's a very clear arc, 3-act structure, beginning, middle, end. I can make a quick short that way. And I thought, okay, it's going to be short. But then she started telling me about her history of being a spy in World War II and getting her dad out of a concentration camp, and how she just handed me a 60-page script that she wrote with Pedro da Silva, who's one of the music collaborators. So I was like, oh no, is this going to be a feature? I can't do 2 features. as Muhammad was saying, I'm already working on another feature, so it was definitely like a hard decision to land on a short. But ultimately, I think like time, and because Inga was traveling and in her old age, it's a little trickier to have like a long haul project like this with an elder. So yeah, we decided on a short that way.
Well, so in a way, it sounds like you all kind of knew. You knew early-ish on Leah that it was going to be a short, and you guys knew from the beginning. So how do you decide what makes something a short? Like, why is this going to be a short story versus something that needs the space to explore with this film or in general?
Good question.
I think in my case, it was, knowing that you're going to make a short kind of forces you to be specific. And there's so much of Miriam's story that we didn't tell. But we decided to focus on a few themes, build out some sort of scene list that kind of was able to map out into a roughly 15-minute landing for the runtime. And, making those hard decisions of, well, we can't talk about some of the specifics that, the interview itself, we had 10 hours of audio, I did 5 interviews with her. And it's tough to boil that down to 15 minutes. And there's a ton of stuff that's not there. So I think it's really just about a choice of deciding what is the ultimate thing you want the audience to take from this and soak from her story. And then everything has to be in service of that. So, and then when I'm working with the editors, the thing I say is like, we're kind of on this highway. We have to make sure we get to the lookout to see the sunrise on time. There's going to be some pretty exits, but let's not take one of those if we're going to miss our final destination, So, and that's kind of how we approached it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because I feel like, every story could be a feature or a short depending on how much time you spend with it. But knowing I had a time constraint with Inga, and I also made it as part of the Jacob Burns Film Center has a class called Creative Culture where you're producing a short film under the director, Sean Weiner, who's also my producer. And so I knew I was making a short, so that's a little different. But overall, there's no right or wrong way to approach it, but I guess I just seek out kind of when I'm looking at a feature versus a short, is a character going through a dramatic change from the beginning to the end, and like, do I have enough time to show that change? And sometimes, it's like the story will reveal itself to you, and if it's showing that and you need more time with it, make a feature. But if you're like, no, I think this is really like the story is about X, and we don't need to spend more time on it if this is a story about X. So it's sort of like one of those things where I think you kind of unveil it while you're going through the process, or you decide that sometimes. But sometimes, you're going to make a short and you have your constraint. So I guess that's how I approach it.
Yeah, and for me, I was so reluctant to make this film from the very beginning. Like, I'm a pretty bashful person, so I didn't really want to live with this for, the years that a feature can take to make sometimes. I was so hesitant to make this film very early on, and it was a matter of kicking around the idea to a couple colleagues and them being really supportive and encouraging. And then I actually was referred to check out Sarah Pauli's Stories We Tell. And that one was like, okay, you can do a film about your family and it not be too exploitive, and it can really look at and meditate and
like not be too self-indulgent.
Exactly.
Too,
that was that was a huge concern for me, is it would be like a look at me kind of thing, which I'm not and it's not. And that film was the one that really kind of turnkey for me and made me feel a bit more secure about going at it.
So what about sort of creatively when you're thinking about these shorts? Like Charlie did this kind of stop motion animation, some other techniques. Part of Mo's film is in black and white. Like there may be different choices than you might have made in a feature. So I'm wondering if that's the case, if shorts give you some sort of creative freedom, or if you approached it in the exact same way you would have. Do you want to start with Charlie?
Yeah, I'll go with that first because that's a big thing for us. If this was a feature, our film is, I think, something like 75% animation, and we wouldn't be able to do that or afford that in a feature film. And also, it would probably get stale after, anything longer than 15 minutes. So that was a big factor in using the animation that we did, knowing that we had a time constraint, and getting to really kind of explode it out and play with it a lot more.
Well, I guess we didn't have any major, time-consuming like special effects or anything like that. But I shot pretty much traditionally doc style. Although I did switch up my style in the middle of which, I saw a documentary called Dina that was at Sundance last year. I loved it, and I loved that like tripod, like beautifully composed. Just like, let's just sit with the character. And I thought, oh, this is the film I'm going to make with Inga because she's an elder.
Where she's like on the couch.
Yeah, and that was
a great
the
scene.
screen test day it was like ended up being our like final like production credit. But I thought I was making that film, and then I realized, that sort of kind of closes me off a bit. And I didn't want to like set a rule for myself that I didn't necessarily feel like was necessary. And I think sometimes rules can be great, and I know a lot of filmmakers that have these rules that work, but for this film in particular, I decided against going like steady tripod. So you might see there's a little bit of a mixture. It's more of a traditional doc where there's like 10 different cameras and a few different DPs. So, but no, we had one DP, Kervin Marseilles, whose was amazing. In a few days we had different DPs, but sometimes that happens, right? When you're working with no budget and
like,
friends.
And the other thing, I've seen your film, so I think it's kind of like Inga too, though. She has like
Right.
she oscillates into these different like personas and characters, and like sometimes she's a little bit more like stationary, and other times she's much more.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we were trying to reflect when we realized, this rule isn't working. So yeah, thanks for noticing.
Yeah, I guess in my brain, like I guess I've through you asking the question. And hearing the other filmmakers talk, I don't really, I guess in my brain, I kind of keep the idea of what a feature and a short is like almost in like completely different places. Probably because I'm actually a narrative filmmaker, so on the feature side, I'm only thinking narratively, and in the short format, I've only really done a few docs recently. Creatively, I think for this film, we chose black and white. For two reasons. One, mainly because some of the locations were challenging as far as our ability to control them. It's kind of like the Kevin Smith Clerk story, like mixed stock, different things, just like black and white takes care of all that. But then as far as the visual language, I wanted to do something that really took advantage of what I thought were the aesthetic strengths of, at the end of the day, you're looking at an image, and I look at everything as a form and a shape, whether it's a person or, skin tones or backgrounds. So I noticed a lot of, when I was looking through the location images, a lot of white, sterile locations, a lot of black women in the foreground. And I thought this would be a way to kind of really lean into that visually. But what I really wanted to do, and I hope it came across at some level, was create some level of separation between their reality and our reality, but then transition that into the audience feeling like, oh no, wait a second, this is our reality. So in the moment of the film, Ko, who's one of the Sister Hearts, looks directly at you, tells you her story for the first time. The women speak for themselves for the first time, and that's when we kind of dip up to color to kind of place the audience into the same world, and to kind of reveal that we are all actually living in the same reality, even though you may think like, oh, this is like something that they're living in, we're living somewhere else,
Right. It was a really interesting stylistic choice.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I'm curious, actually, I'll veer away from the style a little, but it's all related, and you all touched on it. So I feel like narrative features and shorts, in some ways, like they all have their own story, which is part of why it's fun to work at No Film School and get to find out the process. But ultimately, they're all sort of similar, like the way they come together. With docs, I mean, the production stories vary so wildly because you're like going with life. So I'd love to hear kind of how these films were made, even technically speaking. What did you shoot on? It sounds like might have been some different things. So tell me about production.
We set up some creative limitations in the very beginning as a way to we had worked with the same production team that we did my last short in 2015 on, and that one kind of went on way too long, and we could have gone a million different directions, and we kind of tried a lot of the directions in vain. So this was, let's limit ourselves in the beginning and, be a bit more focused and dialed in. So, for example, the animation, which has been kind of funny because a lot of people think that we really planned it out, but we didn't. We kind of just showed up on the day. And Martha, the animator, she had this beautiful technique called Boyle swapping, which is when you play with kind of rhythm and scale and swap out objects for single frames, and it creates these really pretty patterns and whatnot. So she brought that technique, and we just had tons of card tables filled with my dad's stuff, and we're just like, we can only pull from here, and let's do that.
So you got to play.
Yeah, it was play under a lot of stress and time constraints, and in a small, dark studio with no windows and really dusty. And sure, we got to play. Apart from that, working with Joseph Beebe, the writer, I mean, we went through something like 30 drafts of the narration. And that was the first thing. We didn't shoot anything. We didn't really think about what we were going to shoot until that was done. We knew some of the content we had and archival material we could lean on, but we really had to make sure it came out in the writing.
Yeah, I think, knowing all of our films, I think we all have very drastically different production lives, because I didn't hear from Inga for months after I initially contacted her, because she was in Israel at the time. She comes back, she's like, Leah, meet me for lunch tomorrow. I'm like, okay, oh God. So luckily I have to credit the Jacob Burns Film Center Creative Culture Program, because part of that allows us access to all different types of equipment. So we have the 5Ds, the Ursa Minis, and without that assistance, I don't know how I would have done this film. So I just grabbed a 5D and went to meet her. And, I brought my camera and some cookies and tried to bond with her that way. And I felt rushed because I knew that she was only here for a certain amount of time. So my production schedule felt really rushed. So I sort of approached it, not how I typically like to approach production, but knowing her story was so incredible and she was so incredible. I kind of went through it kind of week by week, okay, so this week I know this about Inga, so what should I shoot next week that will service what I think the story is going? So it's sort of this guessing game of where is the story going to go tonight? She's only here for 2 months, so that's why I had a lot of help, and thankfully, with my producers, Christine Wexler, Elizabeth Pocker, and Sean Weiner, and then my editor, and also she was on shoots with me, Steph Corey, helping. So we all kind of did a lot of everything on the production end, because it was kind of really crammed. But ultimately, what was interesting about this film was I knew that the story was headed towards this direction of Inga's experience of old age, and I knew that that was the crux of what I wanted to tell. And at that point, I was working on the edit with Steph, and when we decided that, and I was like, oh, there's images that I want to service that. So we actually went back into production when I thought I wrapped. So that's why there. That I didn't give myself a hard and fast rule about production, because the story was. She had so many different ways of, the story could have gone with her rich history. So, yeah, production was crazy, but we made it through.
That's so hard with people, too, because a person's, we choose the life that we're going to show, and it's sometimes a little bit two-dimensional because there's always other factors as someone else that, you can't include in a short.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they're in their 90s.
Yep, and she canceled on me 5 times, which is why I also had a lot of different folks shoot on this, because I scheduled with my DP Curvin, and then she'd call, I don't want to do it today. And then later that afternoon, where are you? So she went up and down, which is what the film is really kind of shows that when you're 97, and even me, one morning I'll wake up and I'm in a bad mood, and at the end of the day, I'm like, where's the party? So I understand that working with subjects. So, yeah.
For Miriam's story, for Sister Hearts, and my process in it is, I really admire when documentary filmmakers can be so objective. I'm a very opinionated, subjective person. I think I'm not totally capable of being the fly on the wall. Mm-hmm. So, with most of the, and to me in my brain, a doc and a narrative is to me an interview is just like working with actors. What you're really trying to do is pull out some sort of truth out of them that then the audience feels. And in one format, that's a performance, and the other format, it's an interview. And in my first interview with Miriam, we had kind of I do it over Skype. I just send the sound person there to record it, make sure it's usable. I don't like to see the talking head that much. And, talk to her for like 2 hours. And then my first thing I do after a call is like, what are the 5 things I remember? And those 5 things I'll then map out into some sort of outline, some sort of traditional act structure to it, but not as like a rule, but just as a way to just organize. And for Miriam's story, for me, it was clear what the beginning, middle, and end was, what the pivotal kind of things were, what the things I wanted the audience to take away from it. I wanted people to understand what the women's incarceration story is, how it is unique, how these women are unseen, and also be able to make sure that people understood this economic angle of it. Because really, at the end of the day, my whole goal was to champion a person who took adversity and did something with it. So that was my filter. Like, is everything working towards that? And then as far as that goes, what that does is I actually create a scene list, and we shoot it kind of like in a more narrative kind of style where like we shot 4 consecutive days, spent X time at X location, moved on to the next location, moved on to the next location. And I had a script that the crew was using to know what we were doing. And our story called for that, at least the way I approached it. Yeah.
Right, like a verite approach would have been something really different.
Totally. And for me, that's just, I'm creatively right now, like this is the way I want to work right now as far as what that story goes. I wanted to have, the cinema I grew up loving, to me, it was just like doc, narrative, everything. Like, I guess they call it a hybrid now.
Yeah.
I mean, this stuff has been done for a long time. Like, if you've ever seen Close Up, Abbas Kiarostami's film, like, that's like the most meta film of all time because it's,
But it does feel like an exciting moment in this like doc fiction hybrid space.
Sure, it is. Yeah. So, I mean, our formats, film is so primitive. And like, we're still figuring it out.
Well, actually, to that point, and I'll start with you, Mo, you're talking about kind of how this doc short fits into your larger career and that you're focusing also on a narrative feature, which is kind of a different headspace. I'm curious for each of you how these films and your other maybe doc shorts fit into the bigger picture of your career, and what you would say to other filmmakers about maybe the value of like experimenting with a doc short.
Sure. There's a lot of value. For me, documentary, like some documentary, I've watched. I think it was like The Overnighters. That it was like, like you're really this. I would have a hard time, I think, dealing with like that kind of a environment with real people. There's a certain comfort when you're doing narrative work because everything's like not real at the end of the day, some level, right? But for me, learning to interview people, getting them to bring out what I want, and also making sure it's going to work for the edit, is to me like a masterclass in like working with actors. Because you're working with people that aren't trained. You're trying to get them as normal people who don't think their story is interesting to realize that their story is interesting and speak to you in a way that makes them realize that they do have something to say, and I think that's always the biggest hump to get over is making the subject realize like what you experienced or what you're going through or, it's actually important. And as far as the bigger scheme, for me, the work that I would like to do and I'm trying to do is always about giving some sort of voice to people who haven't been able to speak on their terms. Or, aren't represented, I'm an immigrant, so I'm always and I grew up in Silicon Valley. So my parents did not work in technology. We were artists. So I had an experience of being, from a family that was very unseen as far as like what art, we go around like, oh, you grew up in San Jose. Oh, your parents, it's like, no, we grew up in like an apartment complex. My dad's 80, still works full time. You know what I mean? So I'm very, people who, the ordinary person is very fascinating to me. So as far as, that's how I kind of see it fitting in with the greater body of work. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I definitely, hear that and agree with, in my process too. I see this when I'm on a feature, or a narrative film set. I can see that I sort of feel comfortable in it because I'm like, wow, everything's planned out and everything. But then I realize, even though it can be really hard emotionally to make a film, I want to be around people, and I treat it like a learning experience for myself too, because sometimes I'll, read about something or hear about something, and my first question is, I want to know more. So in a way, it's a little bit of a selfish process because I want to learn more about a specific community or underrepresented population, and I want to know, how they've been wronged in the past, how have they been misrepresented in the media, and I kind of then from there the question is how can I change that? And because of my relationship with this person, I see them as a friend, Ingo is like my grandma, and I feel like the characters I'm with, even if I don't agree with them politically or socially, I feel like they're my friends. So in a way, ethically, there's boundaries to be had with that, and you have to stay objective as you can. But I think, that brings a delicacy to your projects, whether it's a narrative or a doc. It's when you work with people, real people and real stories, you kind of feel like you have to create this delicacy, and you want people to experience what you've experienced with them. So I guess, that does, I'm working on a feature about the last abortion clinic on the U.S.-Mexico border and people who don't fit neatly in pro-life or pro-choice lines. And
that's interesting. Is that a doc or a narrative?
Doc, yeah. So, but, in some ways we are seeing it as it could be a narrative. And,
right.
And I think it's just because, there's so many misrepresentations of folks, and I love when somebody watches, and when I watch a film, I'm like, whoa, I didn't know that before, or that changed my perspective, and I crave to recreate that in films that I make. So.
And yeah, for me, there's a lot of overlap between what you guys said, and but I mostly work in narrative as well, and but for me overall, I look at project to project, it's what's right in front of me at the time, and whether that's a 60-second short or a 10-hour long super feature that whatever that doesn't exist. I take it as it comes. But the biggest thing that I really appreciate with documentary is, again, like what Mo was saying, working with real people is very similar to working with actors. You're trying to draw out an answer or a response, and an overlap that I try and get through all my films is to create a sense of empathy for your characters. And and this isn't empathy look at this poor person and feel pity for them. This is, empathy where you want to kind of stand beside them and
relate.
And relate. And the documentary landscape is a pretty great training ground for that. How I'll be able to really transform into a larger narrative like a feature, remains to be seen. But hopefully these are all just things that will work out for me for the benefit somewhere down the line. Who knows?
Just like scouting, filming, and editing, having great music should make your film better instead of being a roadblock. MusicBed is dedicated to making that a reality. That's why they've completely rebuilt their platform of over 650 world-class artists and composers with brand new features, workflows, and an easy checkout process. Want to exclude holiday songs from your search in July? Go for it. Need a folk song that has guitar but no banjos at 120 beats per minute? No problem. With advanced search filters like include, exclude, beats per minute, key, song build, and more, finding the perfect song has never been easier or faster. Even better, they've offered a 20% off discount code. Get 20% off your next on-site license at musicbed.com with coupon code IndieFilmWeekly20. That's IndieFilmWeekly and the number 20. Learn more at musicbed.com/new. I love that there's a thread of empathy kind of between what all of you are saying. And, that's what docs in a way are for, I think. And we talked a little bit about this interesting moment of the doc fiction hybrid. But I also, when I was thinking about this conversation, I was thinking about it being like kind of a golden age of docs. Like we keep talking about peak TV, which is, of course, happening. But I feel like this short doc form, like suddenly there's all these places to see short docs and there's kind of an appetite for them. And even the like little things that show up on Facebook with the subtitles, they are short docs. So I'm curious kind of what your take is on this, like this moment in short doc.
It's definitely exciting. I mean, I was really lucky enough to head out to Sundance this year and check out the short docs, and Charlie's film was there, and I was super, super inspired, like immensely inspired, because everything is so different. Like, you're watching a short doc and I went, I'm like, is this a narrative? Are you sure this is a doc? And that, to me, is like incredible, and the different styles that there are. And it just is going to benefit all of us because there's so many places of inspiration to draw now, and, recreating the medium. I think it's really exciting to see how, all of our films sort of, even though I'm a more traditional doc, but kind of transcend the medium in some ways and are trying new things, and especially your films. And so it's so exciting. And hopefully it'll be lucrative too, because making docs for no money
can always deliver pizza someday.
Yeah,
there's always a backup
true.
crew.
So that would be like a nice addition to the situation, but obviously I don't do it for that. Clearly.
Well, the thing that I love is that I feel like there's kind of just people who watch short docs and people that don't. And some people, they on Facebook occasionally catch one and check it out. But the people that love short docs. And if you really talk to them, you think it would be all that they watch, and they never seen anything over, 40 minutes long. So yeah, I think it's great right now. And I mean, there's so much, people complain about saturation right now, and that there's so many films coming out right now, and it's hard to stand out, but that kind of just raises the bar more than anything. And I feel like every day I see a new film that blows me away, and not just on like a technical level, but on a way to really get into a story and hook onto one, and point it back at you, the viewer, and all that stuff. So yeah, it's totally a good time to be alive.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. The access to content is unreal. And the ability to make content is easier than it's ever been. And I think those two things create a perfect storm, and there's what it teaches you is that we do live in an incredible world. There is a world outside of our own reality. And I think those are very, that's a healthy dose of of something that I think we need as right now in the climate of, that we're living in. So
Alternative facts.
Yeah, alternative facts are just like understand. I think when film does its job, you kind of allow yourself to understand what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes. I think any film that you've ever gravitated towards, I would argue does that at some point. And, I spent a month in like a factory town in Iowa last year, and on a Native reservation and on a Native American reservation. And both cases weren't what I expected. And I think hopefully those films also kind of bring that out too to people. But I think, at the same time, I think you kind of see a similar pattern. Like there's like something works, and everybody else wants to do the same thing, and then usually the brands want to do the same thing. And we're living in kind of in this time of integrity marketing, where everyone kind of wants to make stuff that's real. Because you can skip through ads these days. So all these companies and brands are forced to make stuff people want to watch, because the days of having to sit through a commercial are over. So by default, you're forced to make stuff that's good, which is great. But as creators, we always want to be able to not repeat ourselves, and I think that's what, that's the, and when I talk to, cause I also have a foot in the commercial world, and that's kind of like how I pay the bills and things like that. The people I deal with there is like, don't do that thing you just did. Like push it, you know, give someone what I love about independent film, aside from like, which is much different than the commercial world or the studio world, is it's a culture of taking risks. And I really like that. You know, I didn't know black and white was going to work. I thought it would. I shot it in color just in case it didn't.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And you know, and I can only imagine the similar filmmaker insecurities that you guys are having when you're making your film. You know what I mean? So,
No.
but it's a great time for, you know, we're lucky as filmmakers. I feel really bad for photographers. I feel really bad for musicians. It's rough. You know, I have so many musician friends that are just like, you know, our industry's, you know, effed, you know? And I think we're protected, similar to I think how writers are protected, in the sense that you can't automate story, you know, linear storytelling, or, you know, it's hard. Although I think there is a film here that it's like an AI wrote it, but
They're trying.
I know, they're
We've written about
trying.
it
They're
on Film School a
trying.
few
They're
times, but I agree with you for sure.
Anyway, so that's a long-winded way of just saying, you know, I think we are kind of in a special time right now.
Yeah. Well, to your point too, Charlie, like, where do you guys like to go see this work yourselves? Because you've all sort of said, hey, there's some great stuff out there.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's definitely, if you can check out festivals in your area, I mean, that's always, to me, my favorite place, because you're seeing it on the big screen, and it's definitely a different viewing experience. But, you know, I'm really lucky in that I have a community of friends and filmmakers that are always cranking out shorts and, you know, want help on them or want feedback on them. So I'm consuming them almost every day, you know, and it's exciting because they're my friends. And I think also for like young filmmakers in particular, to just know that you don't need to like go to like Sundance to see the best of the best. Like you and your friend, I mean, you could just make something, and you know, as you said before, it's on social media too. There's all types, but you know, sites like they're gonna blank on me. Short of the Week and Vimeo Staff Pick. I mean, there are so many of those types of sites that you could just like draw inspiration from anywhere, pretty much. But yeah, I mean, I think my favorite is just watching my friends' films and working on them, and that's kind of where I consume short films the most.
Yeah, it's kind of the exact same for me. And Short of the Week and Vimeo Staff Picks is like kind of every hour you check in and see what's up, if depending on what kind of day you're having. And apart from that, it's just festivals are the best. But I hate to say it, but they're way better when you're a filmmaker at the festival, because you meet other filmmakers and it kind of recharges your batteries and fires you up to go make the next thing. And, you know, that's what I take away from most any festival, is like the big screen, and you get to just get completely zeroed in on the film, and, you know, your phone isn't there beside your laptop when you're watching it on your bed, on your belly at 3 a.m. Like,
Right.
Well, we are talking to filmmakers on this podcast, so I think it's great advice. We're always telling people, get to the festivals in your area. It's so
In the area,
important to
yeah.
just
Totally.
meet people, and
And to support it.
yeah, absolutely.
Vimeo, I mean, it's really kind of an amazing thing. And I
And
think
you've had a staff pick or two, right?
yes,
So, you know, big deal over here.
they've been huge supporters of my work, but also so many other filmmakers. And what a special place that you can go, and like I'm on there a lot because, you know, there's, you know, Short of the Week, of course, Vimeo, Boom, and like different places, or like Topic. Like there's some great sites but they all kind of funnel into Vimeo, so I kind of will go there. But I'll check that stuff out too. Back in the day, like, you know, Walfin, but yeah, and I think for me, just like I said, Vimeo is pretty much where it's at for me as far as finding stuff. And the thing they did here was super cool.
That was really cool.
The Vimeo house. I think we all appreciate short films, but we don't value them enough, if that makes sense, because they don't have a space in capitalism.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So It's cool to see that.
Yeah.
That is such
Yeah.
a good point.
Yeah.
I
But
agree.
I think some of that is changing, like in this weird way, and kind of to my whole thinking about the golden age of docs is that, okay, Leah, I don't know that we're really going to make a living making short docs, but it's like the cost to benefit ratio of making a short doc versus a feature now. Like if you can get paid by the New York Times or the Guardian or one of these outlets to show your short doc,
Right.
you're probably making a little more than you would to show a feature because you've spent 5 years and every last dollar on making a feature. So I'm not, it's interesting.
I'll push it even more. I mean, we just talked about, the inclusion writer. Like, what about a short writer? Like, put a short in front of your feature.
That's a great idea.
Like Neon does
Yeah.
that, in some of their.
I think it's a way for people to discover talent. I think it's a way for value to be placed on shorts, because I think it's important for there to be monetary support for a format, or else eventually it will die.
Yeah,
I do
agree.
believe that.
I kind of like that there's no money to be made because there's way like a feature film is a property. Like that is a property to make money off of. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they break even, and that's good enough. But I mean, I like that. That isn't. I feel like if that is fully behind shorts, that the landscape is going to completely change, and there's going to be like a weird new viciousness to it, and you're just going to see all this kind of really hammy stuff start pouring out. I don't know. That's just me. And,
I'm very, very passionate about filmmakers making a living. So anything that allows that to happen, I think I'm going to get behind. I think it should be more of like a licensing thing.
Yeah. Like we could use a little bit of a balance out there too.
I mean, I think one of the things I talk about all the time is like the importance of filmmakers being able to make a living making films. I think because if we really want to see diversity in film, if we really want to see socioeconomic diversity in film, it's got to happen.
Yeah.
Because
1000%.
most of the people I know some crazy talented filmmakers. There's this, Rodrigo Reyes. Do you know him? He's an amazing filmmaker. He made one of my favorite docs ever, Purgatorio. And, he works, he's a translator at a court in like Central California. I mean, this guy should be
Like imagine when he could
this guy should be
do
making
if-
films 24/7.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anything that can help create more diversity, not just in gender and color, but also just like in terms of like different kinds of films having value. I think that's an important thing to try to figure out.
It's a really interesting conversation to keep having. I think, hope we'll all keep having it in our own communities. So finally, we always ask advice because, of course, it's no film school. And I think I'm particularly intrigued in this group about this idea of like traveling between different formats. So what advice do you have for someone who might have been maybe working in features or feature docs, feature narratives, or animation or anything, and they want to approach a short doc? Is there anything very specific you might think to offer them?
Well, how I was saying before sort of like sparked this thing in me that was so true. And when you were talking about like you kind of had like this thesis statement you were writing throughout the whole process. And I think with that, like regardless of what format or genre you dive into, it's like don't limit yourself to rules if you don't need them, and just always follow your story, your thesis. Like if you just you get a piece of paper out. I mean, this helped me a lot. Just get a piece of paper, write down what you think the best thesis you want to, the story that you want to tell is, and then everything you do should be just servicing that. And so I think with that, I mean, that's sort of like the root of, for me at least, the root of my process. And it transcends doc and fiction or a 60-second short or a 70-minute short feature. I mean, just making sure that the story is what you want to say. And the technical stuff you can always learn, I mean, do it yourself. Of course, like there's benefit in, learning the craft from talented folks. But I mean, in that sense, there's always people that could help you with the technical stuff. And yeah, I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah, it's like for me, it's always about like, and that's why I didn't really do in the beginning as much, but I've really come around to it, and that's really write it in the beginning, even if it is a documentary, short or long, write it and write kind of the ideal scenarios. Like I would love it if my subject said this or something to this effect, and leave room for, variations or surprises. But I mean, you make up for that in the edit. There's so many different kind of stages that you have to be adaptable. And yeah, it's just, no one's going to be worse off for making a film. Like every film, even if it's completely terrible and you never want to show anyone, I mean, as long as it's not anything that's, harmful to people, it will serve you better in the long run. Like, it's exercise, and that's the way it works.
Yeah, I mean, Darren Aronofsky's keynote the other day was actually really cool. And one thing I really took away from it as a validating thought is like, make something only you feel like you can make, if you can, you have to be passionate about the thing you're going to do. And I think at the same time, learn the rules, but, it's art, just like you don't need a manual, learn the techniques, learn the rules, but make stuff that's you, and keep doing that. Because I think eventually people will gravitate towards that. I really think it is an industry of just, outlasting doubt, and that's what I think it is, and for me, I think if in the director's position, I think it's very important to understand that you're a leader. And, someone asks, what book should I read about directing? I'm like, actually go read it. My favorite book about directing is written by Vince Lombardi. He's an old football coach, but it's about leadership. It's about taking full accountability. It's about making sure that you're putting people in positions to be successful, and understanding that that the buck stops with you, and you should, anything that doesn't go right, it's on you, and if someone's not doing something the way you want them, well, you ask yourself, well, why did you put them in that position? And I think what that creates is you become someone that people want to work with. And without question, I'm sure both of you guys agree with this, these films were not made by one person.
Exactly.
This is such a collaborative format. There's so many people that touch this film. And it's also, because of that, it is also an industry that doesn't give enough credit to everyone that works on the project. So, it's, don't get caught up in the romanticism of what it being. If when you're directing, you're doing it right, it feels just like, it feels like being the janitor. It feels like being, it feels like it's very blue collar, So, I think that's I think the twist I could put on it is remember that you're leading, and take that with a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, and to add on that, it's refine your team, like choose your good team and stick with them. And I feel like I'm in a really good place with, these are people that I've now worked with on
that's a big deal.
Many films in a row, and we're ready to go for the next one,
Exactly.
already. And it's have those people, and it's not just shorthand, it's confidence and knowing that people can bring different ideas, and then eventually, everyone kind of steers their own team, and
Especially it sounds like your film too, because you're doing such personal subject matter. You gotta make sure.
We had to turn into a job, so I didn't fall apart when we were making it, and they all kind of carried me. Not gonna lie.
I bet.
Yeah, same. I went through a very deep hole in like the self-doubt world, and I really, without the team I was with, I don't think it would have been made, really. So, yeah.
Well, I think a lot of our audience is going to be able to relate to that, and also to find this conversation so valuable. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening. Death Metal Grandma will next be screening in Hot Docs in Toronto. You can see My Dead Dad's porno tapes on the New York Times website, and Sister Hearts is on Vimeo. If you liked this conversation, check out our other shows. On Wednesdays, our mini-series called The First Feature, a step-by-step primer on making your first film based on the making of Ryan Koo's Amateur. And on Thursdays, our Indie Film Weekly news show that fills you in on everything you might have missed when you were busy making films. You can get any of these by searching for the No Film School podcast in iTunes or your favorite app. Also, be sure to visit nofilmschool.com for useful new filmmaking articles every single day. Meanwhile, stay in touch. You can reach me on Twitter at LizFilm, and we are on Twitter at NoFilmSchool. See you on Thursday.